Welcome to the For the Love of the Game podcast on I will call it the Michael Jordan episode, episode number 23, with your hosts, Jefferson Belfort and Brian Hernandez, and our special guest, Joe Spinella. How you doing, Joe?
What's up, guys? I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Man, this is gonna be such a fun episode today. We have a lot of really good topics for everyone. But yeah, I'm most excited to have Joe on. So this is gonna be a great time.
Yeah, actually, before we go, I guess we could give a little background to how we
Yes.
know Joe and why today? Why today we chose Joe to accompany us on this, and I'll go through that. I'll let Joe do his little intro, and then I'll go over the topics.
Sure. Yeah. Well, again, super excited to be on here with you guys. I've known these two, Brian and Jeff, for years now through college, William Patterson. And we've always just been massive sports fans. We always are talking shop about basketball. Me and Jeff are just huge Nets fans, and I'm gonna try to be as neutral and as unbiased as I can when talking about the Nets. But I'm super excited. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, and I appreciate you guys having me on for sure.
Great, man. Like we always say, me and Brian, since we started, always say that is like we try to be the most objective of fans, and
Yeah.
eh, being from the New York, New Jersey area and the type of teams we have here, it helps to be that because your team's usually is bad or going through something bad. So it makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, at least you guys are having a good time right now. The Nets are in the next couple weeks though, when you guys yeah, we'll talk more about it. We'll talk more about it soon. So Jeff, let's go through the topics.
All right, so we're going to start off the pod today with discussing the Warriors and their recent slump that they're going through and how that's impacting them and their seeding. Then we'll go over Chris Paul and his injury and how that's impacting what the Suns are doing. And does it show us that Suns might not need him as much as we think? And then we'll go to the Nuggets and are they really poised for a deep postseason run? And then lastly, we'll be doing a team spotlight on our beloved Nuts. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, perfect. So, just starting off, like we mentioned, I'm sure you guys, yesterday actually was a pretty jam-packed sports day. So it was kind of hard to like fit in the Warriors Laker game into there as well. But my God, it was an actual beautiful game. LeBron went out for 56 last night. He put on a show, and the team that we're going to talk about was playing as well, the Warriors. And unfortunately for them, they lost. And they have not been looking really good lately. And due to them losing last night, they actually fell down to the third seed in the West. And the Grizzlies have overtaken the second seed at this point. Obviously, it's just a game back at this point, half a game back actually at this point. So, what do you guys think about this recent run by the Warriors, and what do you think is impacting this?
So Joe, I'll let you go first.
Sure, definitely. So I definitely tuned in for the Warriors Lakers game last night. And first of all, LeBron was just an absolute monster. He was just unstoppable. I think he had 56 and 10, something like that, and he was just a beast. And I think it just goes to show how much that they really missed Draymond. They had nobody to put on LeBron. LeBron was basically playing like the center position last night, posting people up, and they just had nobody to throw on him. And I mean, they have Looney, they have Bielitsa, but it just shows how important Draymond is for that team. What he does on the defensive end, what he does on the offensive end, working with Steph, setting screens, helping facilitate the offense. I think that just missing him just has such an impact on the team. And even Clay has been kind of going through a little bit of a slump, which was kind of expected, him coming back from the injury, him being the shooter that he is, that, you tend to typically go through either slumps of bad shooting or periods of time where you have good shooting. So, I think when the playoffs comes around and it's coming around very, very soon, I think you'll start to see the Warriors start to get things together. Poole looks really good. Wiggins looks really good. I love Gary Payton. I think he's just an incredible role player for them. And I think when the playoffs comes around that they're going to start to pick it up.
I 100% agree. I think this is pretty much just kind of shows you like the Draymond Green effect of like when he's not on the floor, these kind of things can happen. And there's a reason why they are slumping. Of like, if you look at, so according to Cleaning the Glass, the Warriors were or this entire season, they're 14th best offense and the third best defense. And it's like, even without Draymond this whole time, they're still the third best defense. But in these last 2 weeks, they're still the 14th best offense, but they're the 26th ranked defense. So like right now, that's where it's killing them. And with how like there's so many great like YouTube videos out there you can see of like the impact of Draymond Green on this team. Like he doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but there's a reason why the Warriors have been like a dynasty this entire time, and it's a big part of it is Draymond. So right now he is out because he had a lower back injury. There's a disc problem in his lower back since January 5th. So he hasn't played. So this entire time, yeah, we're seeing the Warriors slump, but we haven't actually seen Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green all play together at the same time. And so I'm sure by the time the playoffs, I did a little research of like when Draymond should be expected back. There's no official timetable that I've seen, but it looks like he's starting to practice as of like a week or so ago. And I'm not too worried about this little slump. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, so actually I was listening to the Draymond Green podcast, so he gave his own update on it,
Oh,
and
there you
he
go.
was saying that he was mentioning that he is back in practice, so he is taking light drills, but obviously still not full 5-on-5 drills, but he said that he's close and he's nearing a return for March, right? Um, and you know, I wouldn't discount that there isn't anything to be concerned about. Like I do think there is, but it may not be to the level of like when you bring up exactly the team they were playing yesterday, the Lakers. But it just goes to show, and it just speaks to what Draymond brings to the table as part of their team. Um, is he cannot be replaced, and there really is no one in the league that fits this team better than him to make it work, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I bring that up and the reason why I say that is we all know that Steph Curry is a generational talent. We know what he brings to the court is just out of this world, right? But it's so crazy to think when you look at it and you see it. Curry, I'm not saying his game is middling in the sense that he could put up this points and it doesn't matter, but does not affect the game as much when Draymond is not there because they take a lot of that playmaking abilities out of Steph Curry's game and allow for him to just find his shot a lot. I'm not saying he can't do that, but it takes away from his game if he is doing that, right? If he's playmaking. So one of the things that everyone talks about are calls for why they enjoy seeing Steph Curry's game is how good he is off the ball. And I think once they figure that out, when they were taking this initial championship run, that's when Steph Curry truly began to maximize what he's doing out on the court and being able to take those shots. A lot of other star players, and it took years to like start seeing this, but a lot of other star players are asked to be that scorer and also be that playmaker. Steph Curry is one of the players that is uniquely asked most of the time to just be the scorer. And I think that that's a benefit for him, and that's why you see when you have a stretch like this. Like, did you guys see that in the last 10 games, they've only won 2 games. So some of the concerns like we've seen with teams like I remember when Kevin Durant initially went down, we saw a slump like this, and we're like, they're gonna right the ship. But we're now looking at the Nets being a 500 team right now. So there's certain type of players that impact how the team is going to play on the court. And Draymond Green, it just goes to show that Draymond Green is that type of player that is going to greatly impact how everyone on the court plays. And then lastly, just bringing up, me and Brian was shooting over a couple messages the other day. I think it was yesterday actually.
Yeah.
And player that a lot of people was harling for. He deserves to have this shine. He's reinventing his career. Uh, and his name's slipping my mind right now.
Andrew Wiggins.
But Andrew Wiggins, yep. So Andrew Wiggins has been slumping since the All-Star break. And this is why we were asking the questions before is, does he really deserve the All-Star start over Draymond? And it's kind of showing. And since the break, he's only averaging around 14 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, shooting around 39% from the field, and then 36%. This might be a typo. I don't know if this is true, but 36% from the free throw line. If that's actually real, I got to look that one up. But if that's actually real, that is very, very concerning.
Yeah, that's I was actually saving that. I wanted you to touch on that because you're the one that sent me the Andrew Wiggins stuff. But like, he's actually been like that bright spot for the team. He does a lot of the dirty work, and that the fact that he was able to make his 3-point shot like as good as it is right now. For the season, he's still shooting 40% from 3 on 5.5 attempts a game. Like, extremely impressive, huge for the team. But yeah, when you see him slump like that, it just kind of shows you like, yeah, Steph Curry's amazing, Klay Thompson's amazing, but it really can't be only them two. That you need these other guys to have good games. So when they're slacking, it goes to show.
Absolutely. And I think, like, to your point, Brian, it can't only be them two. I feel like the Warriors have always been known for not just having Steph and Klay and Draymond, but their bench. Their bench has always been just a bunch of just solid ballers who can just pick up the slack when Steph or Klay or Draymond aren't doing well. I think it was in the 2019 playoffs when Toronto went to the finals, and that whole run that the Warriors went on, I'm pretty sure I remember in the finals they were like sitting Steph and Klay and Draymond and just having this like Sean Livingston lineup at the point guard, and they were doing really well. Like, they were holding their own. So I think the key this year for them is once the playoffs come, I'm sure Klay will snap out of it, of course. Like, he'll start playing well. Steph will start playing well. Draymond will come back. And then I look at a guy like Jordan Poole, who you're kind of putting him back into a bench role. Can he come off the bench and give you 15, 20 points a night and kind of give you a little bit of that offense when Steph and Klay aren't necessarily on the floor? You also haven't had James Wiseman, who, although he's kind of a second-year big and who really knows what his impact will be, is still just a missing big from the rotation that you could use. But you also have Kaminga. Kaminga's a really solid talent who, when he's playing well, it just adds a different level to the offense and the defense. So I think it's really also going to come down to those guys and how do they really step up once crunch time hits and once the playoffs are underway.
I
Add to
like.
that too is what I've been thinking about recently is you bring up Jordan Poole. I agree. I think his initial run in the beginning part of this season was pivotal because it gave them the confidence to go out there and play the way he was playing because the lineup was made around him to be a starter, right? So given more chances to shoot, given more chances to take his own shot, and then the team was allowing him to have that green light, right? Um, no one ever talks, or we don't talk as much about like the dichotomy of like being a starter and being a bench player. As a bench player, you are asked a lot to sit probably the first initial 10 minutes of the game being cold, like after shoot around, getting your shot feeling good, and then sit down for a 10 minutes, 8 minutes period, then come into the game and then try to find your shot in real time, you know? And I think about that with like Jordan Poole is what's affecting him being a bench player again. And obviously, it definitely does take a little hit on your confidence as well. But I think he'll figure it out. One thing that I wanted to pose to you guys and ask about what you think about this is now I'm looking back at that draft, and I believe it was 19. And we're thinking about James Weissman again. Is James Weissman is severely dealing with injury problems, and he's poised to come back, but he was poised to come back for the last 2 months. And we talk about how, or I brought up how we've moved away from Steph Curry being a traditional um, ball handler at this point and being more an off ball guy. Yes, I know Draymond picks up the slack for that, but now how much of you is thinking that they should have went for LaMelo when they have the chance? Because I think having two ball handlers and really buying into that small ball lineup would benefit them more long term than what they're doing right now. Do you guys agree with that, or you have a different mindset?
Yeah, I'd say yeah. I mean, I think this is one where like at the moment, I I even was like pushing for them to go after Lamelo, but like I understood the James Wiseman, why they took James Wiseman. So now when you're looking back at it, 2020, hindsight's 2020. Yeah, it's pretty clear. Like Lamelo was the easy pick there. The Warriors. So generally, a lot of times for the draft, you don't have a team drafting that's won multiple championships. That has Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green picking second. That almost never happens. So in this situation, it did kind of make sense to pick for fit because the Warriors, think about it, this entire time, who's been their best center throughout the last decade? It's, like I couldn't really tell you because they're all like just terrible names out there. It's not great. And so even just thinking of like James Wiseman, 7 foot, 240, just having that big body there is pretty nice and it's pretty huge. Because right now, what Kevon Looney's playing their center, he's 6'9", 220. Like that's when you go against a Jokic in the playoffs, like that is not who you want guarding Jokic. Um, but so that's where like Draymond Green, that's where his impact is. But I don't. That's where it is. Like if James Wiseman never got injured, maybe this would be a different conversation. But even when he did play, he really didn't look too great. But I understood why they made that pick. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah. So I agree with you, Brian. I completely understand why they made the pick. Especially him being a top tier center coming out of the draft, and they have such a need for a center. I think it all comes down to, honestly, like Andrew Wiggins. And I say this because if Andrew Wiggins isn't an all-star, if Andrew Wiggins doesn't play well, if he's inconsistent, he's now your starting small forward. So all of a sudden you're coming into the season and you're having a shitty Andrew Wiggins and no center. So, and when it comes to LaMelo, I've also been an advocate of them taking LaMelo from the draft for the sole reason that you didn't at the time, see, like, looking back on it, you didn't know that Andrew Wiggins was even going to be what he is now, which is great that he is, but LaMelo is a 6'8" point guard, and I just want to read you a couple stats over the last couple games, right? 31 points, 25, 22, 14, that's okay. 18, 13, 17, 24, and 24. So this guy has a really high scoring potential. He's 6'8". He kind of fits that small forward role where you could potentially have LaMelo as a starter, Wiggins off the bench, or switch it around, and then maybe you can go after another big. I mean, you do have Looney. I'm a huge Bielitsa fan. I think that him and Steph Curry have such a chemistry. So I don't think it is out of the realm of possibility and logic to think, hey, maybe they did make a mistake and should have taken LaMelo over James Wiseman. So I think that's a good question to ask for sure.
I think too with if you think about like LaMelo fitting, like why is LaMelo so good right now? And it's like you think about it where his role is in Charlotte of like being that star guy, the ball handler, the guy that like to makes things happen. Is that a great role for him in Golden State? Potentially. I mean, I like it. I like it when that ball is free flowing and moving really nicely with that with those three stars over there. Like I'm sure it could. I mean, it would work 100%. It would look really nice. It's just I don't think we would have the same LaMelo ball that we have right now that's in Charlotte in Golden State.
So my thing with that as well is I don't think it detracts that much from his game because LaMelo, as much of as good as he's looked, he's not your best shooter, right?
Yeah.
And I think his role fits very well in the sense that to a certain degree, he can be a slasher, right? And the Warriors, the middle of the paint is like opening up the Red Sea, like it's wide open because everyone's stretching, right? Reason why I bring that conversation up about Wiseman and like keeping it into consideration of whether or not they should have went for LaMelo over him is I agree with you, Brian. I think that at that moment, as a championship contender team that still has your core together and not relatively old, but not relatively young either, um, it was a good risk to take Weissman and hope for the best at that moment. But I also think that it was also a good time to take a risk on a guy like LaMelo because just keeping in mind, like I said, how the game would change with having two playmakers on the court. Because sometimes I think the ball sticks. If Draymond can't find it, or there's ways where they're slowing down Draymond from his playmaking abilities. Having that second playmaker on the court that allows for to free up Steph Curry and free up Clay to find their shots a little bit more makes it even easier. And then not only that, the difference is having that secondary playmaker being someone that can actually shoot as well honestly puts more onus on the defense to crash, and try to and there's going to be less collapsing, right? Like you see the defense collapse on Draymond because they know he's not going to shoot. If they know he's going to do something, he's going to the rim more likely than not, right? So as you're crashing and doing that, who says you don't pop it to LaMelo? Now they have to be honest. He can crash to the rim as well, or take a shot, and in that time, it frees up a Steph Curry or frees up a Clay, or they decide, hey, we're gonna still double Steph, and that means he's just running. He's running wide open. I think it would have fit. It would have worked in that sense, right? But also, another reason why I felt that way is let's think about those championship years. They never had a tremendous center. I know we always talk about it and we always say like they could look better if they had a tremendous center, but they won 3 championships without a tremendous center. I liken it to when the Bulls made their runs in the 90s, they had to find guys in the margin, right? I see like if they did make that choice to get get a LaMelo, would be like when the Bulls got like a coup coach, a player that can be ultimately a star on some other team, but he would service this team very, very well in that sense to be that added punch, either if it's by way of a 6-man or actually being a starter. But obviously, like you said, Brian, hindsight's going to be 2020 on this one. But I do think that if he was on this team, it would have been a perfect fit, and we would have been looking at them as a team like you're like, oh man, when Curry leaves, there's someone to hand it off.
Yeah, it definitely is like James Wiseman so far. It's still so early in this guy's career. I think he's 19 or 20. Like there's a lot to go on here. So far, not looking too great, but I mean if there's anywhere for him to look good, this is probably one of the better spots. So it's it'll be interesting to see how he progresses and how he fits going forward.
I think he's still just 20.
Yeah. That's crazy. So I just think if the Warriors didn't pick James Wiseman, like it's not like the talent wasn't there. James Wiseman was still going top 3 regardless. It's just that it made more sense fit wise for the Warriors, but LaMelo definitely is a better player as of now. Do you want to move on to our next topic?
Yeah. So I'll lead it off. Recently, not recently, I think it's been about 2 weeks now since Chris Paul got the diagnosis that I believe it was a fracture. Don't quote me on it, but I believe it was a fracture in his wrist, right thumb. I'm sorry. And due to that, he's going to be sitting out 6 to 8 weeks. And through that time, we have seen that the Suns don't look as bad as you would think would. You didn't think. I wouldn't say I thought that they would completely slump or fall off the earth when he left, but they've held their own. They've had they're in their last 10, they're 8-2. So they've only really experienced one loss since Chris Paul has been out of the lineup. So, and I believe that loss was to the Jazz. I think it was last Sunday actually, but they look good. They still look good. And then now they're also dealing with Booker out for health and safety protocols, and they still look good. So it begs me to ask the question. Obviously, initially we saw the impact of what Chris Paul brings to the team and how it changes everything. But what do you guys think about the team still looking relatively good without him, and what does that mean to his impact?
Joe, you can take this one.
I certainly will. So I absolutely love the Phoenix Suns right now. They're either going to the Western Conference Finals or the NBA Finals. I truly believe that. I want to read you guys some stats. I'm on a stat kick today. Before Devin Booker was out for health and safety protocols, the last 7 games, okay? 26, 26, 24, 20, 25, 30, and 30. And what is he? 25 years old? I mean, that's just insane. He is going to be such a great player for such a long time. He already is, and just look at their team. I feel like their team has just such good chemistry even without Chris Paul. JaVale McGee just fits like a glove. I don't even know what they're going to do with Deandre Ayton. I think they should keep him, but who knows what they're going to end up paying him. What gets me is Cam Johnson's playing ridiculous. Um, the other Cam, I'm blanking on his last name. The other Cam, the point guard Cam, he is playing really good as well.
Okay.
Yes, and it just drives me crazy. Could you imagine if they didn't make the Landry Shamet trade and they would have gotten Cam Thomas from the Nets, the 3 Cams? That could just be that could have just been such an incredible bench, and they just seem so connected. They seem like they're just such a well-rounded team, and they're going to go really, really far in the playoffs.
I think this is kind of as well of like the Chris Paul effect of Chris Paul actually doesn't need to be on the floor. I mean, look everywhere where Chris Paul goes, everyone gets better. And that's kind of like what Joe was mentioning of the culture, all this stuff. Like he's like another coach on the team. This man he just helps everyone gel together. So yeah, although he is injured at the moment, I think Devin Booker, there's a quote that I'm going to read from Devin Booker, but he actually put it perfectly of the quote goes, I look at the beauty of it. He gets to rest his legs. He gets to get ready for a long postseason that we're trying to make. And it's like, that is kind of the perfect way to think about it, because when you think about Chris Paul, every playoffs, he looks amazing and then he gets hurt and then his team loses. Every single time this ends up happening for Chris Paul, and it's like, oh, so now for the next 6 to 8 weeks, he actually doesn't have to have the daily load of playing in NBA games. He gets to rest and everything and get right. That actually sounds pretty nice, and especially too, as of now, like you mentioned, Jeff, the Suns are still playing amazing. Like they're not losing too many games or anything like that. It's not really a drop off. If anything, too, they can actually afford to lose some of these games to rest Chris Paul and stuff like that. This man's 36 years old. I mean, he has a history of getting injured. Like, you want him to get some rest. So, man, if anything, this may be a blessing in disguise. You get to have some of your younger players play extremely well, gain some more confidence. It looks amazing.
No, I agree. The reason why I thought this would be an interesting topic to talk about today was, I've always been the advocate of saying, why isn't anyone on the Suns being considered for an MVP? I've been saying that since last year. But Chris Paul usually was the name that I would bring up when I would say that. But in the stretch, it just made me start to think about the fact that, yes, as much as Chris Paul has changed the culture, it is easy to say that Monty is a big reason why it's changing as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to discredit what Chris Paul is doing or what he has done since he's been a part of the Suns, but for Monty to find a way for it to be effortless when Chris Paul is in the game and out the game, and also Chris Paul, like you mentioned, Brian, serving as a coach on the bench as well, just goes to show like there's more to this team than it was just Chris Paul's impact of play. Yeah. And No, I guess I'll liken this back to like the Warriors conversation, and even bringing up the Nets into this situation is like I brought up the impact in the sense of when that player leaves, like when Draymond leaves, you feel that that guy is truly the quote unquote MVP of that team because he really is the one that makes the thing move. When Kevin Durant went down, same thing. You know that once he left, you started to realize very, very quickly he is the reason why the team moves. In this situation, it's completely different. It's Chris Paul is down and they're still figuring it out. And it's going to a conversation I was having privately with someone else about the Miami Heat and their culture. And I'm starting to feel that it's more of a culture thing than it is about this person could be an MVP or this person is bringing so much to the table. And that's why we don't see either one of those teams have a player that's being considered for MVP. It's because I think if you could switch out players and it would still work for both teams because of the culture that they've built. And I always think about how you could take a guy like Duncan Robinson, and he looks amazing when he's playing. Not too great this year, but he looks amazing on the Miami Heat. But you pull him out of that team, is he that same player? I don't know. Cam Johnson, and I tried not to bring this up, Brian. I didn't want to. I know the wound is still it's still so fresh, but Cam Johnson, what he did the other day is, I don't know if you guys watch Flight on YouTube, but man, that's inspirational, man. That's what that was, like him putting up the 28 in the second half, I was it the second half or the fourth quarter? I don't know. I don't remember.
20. It was definitely more than 20 in the fourth quarter.
So that was a amazing showing from him, right? But I still ask myself, if you take Cam and you put him somewhere else, will he be that same player? Will he have that confidence? Would he be able to play the way how he's playing now? And that's why I'm leaning more to the fact of I'm okay with them not having a player that's considered as an MVP. And yes, Chris Paul is leading the drive of changing that culture, but a lot of it is to speak to what Monty is allowing this team to become, and that is festering into it as well. And then, like Joe brought up, Devin Booker is going to always be a workhorse in that sense. He's always going to be able to give you at least 20 points a game. So just making all of it fit is what's most impressing about this team. And to see that 2 years ago, they were close to contention for a playoff. And it showed in that 8-game winning streak they had in the bubble that something was brewing and changing. And with how Monty was coaching that team, and then it led into being something even more once they officially brought Chris Paul into the fold.
You mentioned with the culture and so one right now, like you're saying, we were talking about this whole time. And without their two best players, the Phoenix Suns are still playing extremely well, and it's like this team is extremely deep, and they're all their players are really good. But it comes back to that culture thing, because you look at someone like Bismack Biyombo. This man has his career going left and right, going to all these different teams, and he looked pretty terrible for the most of it. He's had a few great playoff series, and other than that, he really hasn't looked great. He comes onto the Suns after not being anywhere, and now he's looking amazing again. And it's it really goes to show it's a huge culture thing. We look at even the Knicks last season. It was a huge culture thing. All those players are terrible. They're not great. But when the culture and everyone's working together, they look good. Look at the Nets. When the Nets before they got KD and Kyrie, and they had D'Angelo Russell, who was thrown away from the Lakers, and all these other guys. they all work together. You saw the culture. You saw all these guys dancing. Jared Dudley was a huge part of that. Like, it's a huge team thing. So it can't be you know, understated enough like that. It's just so important.
100%, Brian. And I think one of the biggest things that I'm super excited about with the Suns is their potential. Where can they go from here? Because I feel like everyone gets caught up in the now. Can they win a championship now? And if they can't, then oh, they're a bust. But in reality, listen, Devin Booker's 25. Mikal Bridges is 25. Cam Johnson's 26. Cam Payne is 27. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a young team, and they're going to be around for a while. Devin Booker's already this good, and he's not even in his prime yet. He's 2-3 years from his prime. So it's where they can take this team in the future with a Chris Paul who, yeah, he's getting up there in age, but he's still just an unbelievable player. It's super exciting to see where the Suns are going to be in a couple years from now, and if we're still going to be looking at them in the same way.
It's funny, Joe, like you mentioned a little bit earlier too, but like we don't really talk about DeAndre Ayton too much. We forget this man was a number 1 pick in 2018.
Yeah.
Like this, they have just so, and he's 23. Like it's just so much potential.
I will say that I want to contradict what you're saying, though, Joe. Is we've had so many teams where we talk about how good they look as even though they have a young, talented team, right? I think the moment to strike the iron is now. You got to win now because there's no way you're able to hold on to all those players. You already have issues with trying to sign DeAndre Ayton. Um, now, and no one talks about it anymore, but the NBA even hasn't have a definitive answer or concluded this investigation with their owner. So we don't know how the influx of cash will look for them coming into this summer, coming into next few summers. So it's in their best interest to go for it now. And then you pick pieces that you think are going to stay because you could very much see a situation that's like happening with the Hawks, where just like last year, we said they're a very talented team. They're pretty deeply young guys, but you just cannot keep everybody. It's hard with how the salary cap rules are set up to keep everyone and pay everyone. So it's time to decide who do you think you want to move away from, even though they're all talented, and who can be a veteran presence you have for a year or two to add on to a young talent that you already have, right? But it's so hard to make that decision. I'm not trying to make it seem like it's an easy fix to just decide on those things, but it is going to be a question they're going to have to ask if they don't find a way to win very soon.
Jeff,
Please, Joe. Please.
I completely agree with that. I have a question that I want to pose that I think is really interesting regarding DeAndre Ayton. Where do you think that he ranks among the top bigs in the NBA? Because if I'm looking at the top big guys, I don't think he's better than Giannis. He's not better than Jokic. He's not better than Embiid. He's not better than AD. Maybe he's at that fifth spot. Maybe there's someone that I can't think of that's better, So it's curious that you name all those centers that are probably better than DeAndre Ayton, and now you're hearing things that the Suns may not want to re-sign him. It's curious to see what they think about him. I don't know.
I guess for me, it's not that he's a great center, but having Chris Paul on that team unlocked him, just like how it unlocked like a DeAndre Jordan early in his career. But same thing that happened with DeAndre is what I'm seeing here. With Ayton is that they're more of traditional centers. They are not, and nowadays that is not the traditional center, but he's not a guy that's going to stretch the floor for you. He's not a guy that's going to be, and I do like his defense, but he's not the most versatile defender you're going to have that could switch 1 through 5 with everyone in my mind. Um, but he definitely has that same mold of, pick and roll game. You can find him in the post, you'll find him and he'll go to work, right? And he's always had that since he's joined the league. And that's why I say it fits perfect with Chris Paul, because Chris Paul still plays a traditional NBA game as well. And as we see more and more teams move away from that and play more spreading the floor out, small ball, they have gone away from playing centers in that way. So having a guy that can go in the middle and have his way with most teams, it's refreshing, I guess. But at the same time, it becomes an issue because of how dynamic big men are now. Yeah. And I just couldn't foresee putting him ahead any of those guys that you said.
He might just be that next guy. Just because like those other guys are a completely different tier. And like we even saw Ayton last postseason. Like he can get pretty close to there. Like he can turn it up. He's a little bit slower in the regular season. Like he has his ups and downs. Like he has games where he looks amazing, and then he has games where he completely disappears and you forget he's on the court. So that's where it's like it's troubling when this guy's demanding a max contract and you have to pay him all that money. Like you're not necessarily worth that much, but you're close. You're like in the 25 million range, not the 35 million range. What I did want to push like back on what you mentioned, Jeff, of like this is the time now. And I actually have to say the main players for the Suns, they actually play this very smart, because you think about all their main guys, they kind of re-signed them not too long ago, and they'd signed them to like closer to team-friendly deals. You just re-signed Mikal Bridges. You have him locked in for the next like 4 years. He's golden. You just kind of re-signed Campaign to a super team-friendly deal when he was amazing in the playoffs. You just re-signed Chris Paul. Like you pretty much your windows until Chris Paul retires essentially. Like, and then Devin Booker, you have another 2 years on his contract. Like most of their main guys, they actually have locked into contracts already. So now it's just that, do you re-sign Deandre Ayton? And then all those other guys that fill in all those other roles are generally, those minimum contracts and those team options, and I mean, not team options, but mid-level exceptions and all that other stuff. So they actually have a ton of room to play with.
And based off of that, what are you thinking about re-signing Deandre Ayton? Do you give him the max contract? Because I don't think he's given up on the thought of that.
Yeah.
And what do you think that does if he doesn't sign?
I kind of feel like you kind of have to, just because what's their next best option? If you don't sign Deandre Ayton, who do you replace him with? Like they're really, especially centers that can do what he does. And there really isn't a ton of guys out there and out in the market. And then as well, maybe you want to sign. I mean, that's the thing. Centers are so expendable, so like it's really not too bad. But especially DeAndre Ayton's 23 years old. Like I feel like you do just sign him. What was your second question there? I forget. I think you had a follow on. Well, yeah.
I do remember. Is what do you think they look like without him then?
Without him, like I mentioned, like I don't think they really look too much different without him. Like I said, there's plenty of games where he just kind of disappears, and it doesn't really. They don't really need him. You got Chris Paul, you have Devin Booker, you have Mikal, you have all these other guys that can fill in that role and that can play great defense as well. Like you don't necessarily need him too much. It's just that you already have this guy on your team, and he's already so talented, and he has so much more potential going forward. Like, it doesn't to me, like, if you have the money, that's the problem. Their ownership, it doesn't have a ton of money, but so they want to be a little conscious of that. But uh I wouldn't mind. I would do it. I would pay him. Do we have anything else we want to say about the Suns before we move on to this next topic? I'm good on my end. All right. I guess I'll cover it. I'll take this one. So next we have the Nuggets we're talking about. And now the Nuggets. This is, we talked a bit about them last episode, but we just got some pretty big news that it is expected that Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. are going to be back for this postseason. So this begs to the question. All right, the Nuggets are sitting in the 6th seed right now with a record of 37-26, just behind them. So that's if people forget, the play-in is teams 7 through 10. So you want to stay in that 6th seed at least. So, and that 7th seed right behind them are the Timberwolves, who have actually been playing really well recently, that have a record of 36-29. So, with Jamal Murray coming back, with Michael Porter Jr. coming back, do the Nuggets actually have a chance? Joe, what do you think?
So I think if Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. were healthy for the start of the season, they would probably be a top 4 seed in the West. And if they're coming back before or in time for the playoffs, they're going to be a legit contender. Now that all depends on how Michael Porter and Jamal Murray like ramp back up. I mean, it may take them some time to like get back into a rhythm, but so before Jamal Murray got injured, I have some more stats. I came with a bunch of stats.
Oh, man.
From December 29th, 2021 to April 4th, 2020, 2020, December 29th to April 4th, 2021, there was a 46 game stretch. 28 of those games, Jamal Murray had 20 plus points, and about 10 of those games, he was averaging from 30 to 50 points. So that's just a kind of a snippet of the type of scoring that you could potentially get from him. And he's just such an elite scorer, he is this team's true point guard. Michael Porter is just a great fit with the Nuggets. And also Boogie Cousins. I love Boogie Cousins. I think he was a great addition to the team. He kind of fills that like backup center spot. Aaron Gordon, like they have a lot of solid pieces. Like Aaron Gordon's a great piece. Will Barton's a great piece. They just have to be able to put it together and just figure this whole thing out. But getting Jamal Murray back is just going to be just a huge help for them. And if they have him back, I just think the sky is the limit.
All right. Hey, just experiencing a little technical difficulties, but we're back and just picking up right from where Joe was discussing about this Nuggets team. Joe, do you want to add a little bit more to that, or I could pick it up if you're
yeah, I think the only other thing I want to add is just how good Jokic is playing. He's just playing at such an elite level. I mean, without Jamal Murray, without Michael Porter Jr., just the fact that they're still in the spot that they're at, and he's just an absolute beast. I mean, he's just playing incredible, and he's definitely a top candidate for the MVP.
Agreed. And, it's just this team, we had the pretenders contender conversation, I believe, last week about them. And we were talking about if everything fits in right, like this team can make a run, can make a crazy run in the postseason. I just want to see what Jamal looks like when he comes back. Michael Porter is more scary, though, of a situation than Jamal's situation ever will be, because Porter has a lingering back issue. This is about his second our third injury surgery, I think he's had on his back, and we've heard about the history with even in his family having this issues with the back. So uh, does this? I think they're good enough even just with Jamal. But to have both of them be healthy and ready to make a run makes them more poised to win the series. I think there is argument, even though they got swept, there's argument that they could have very well won that series against the Sun last year
Yep.
with both of those guys there. So now putting a wrench in everything and having them back and figuring it out makes me think that, hey, even though there's not enough time to like figure out all the quirks through the game, but they should hit the ground running, because the way how Jokic plays really does open up the floor and makes everyone look a lot better than they really are on that team.
See, yeah, you mentioned of like it opens up the floor, and so you think about it. Now you add they've been it opens up the floor, and they've been missing their two best 3-point shooters this entire time. So like, what is this gonna look like when these guys are back? Like, it's gonna be pretty insane. And to touch on like Joe, you mentioned they'd probably be top 4 in the West if they had all these guys from the start. And you kind of think about it, it's like, yeah, you got the Suns, you have the Warriors, you have the Grizzlies, who, man, the Grizzlies are so good right now. And then you have the Nuggets. Like, those 4, I can see any of those making it to the NBA Finals. That's fantastic. It's crazy to see like how well they've been doing. Meanwhile, you've been missing a Jamal Murray, who's a 21 point 21 point scorer a game from your team. You have Michael Porter Jr., who I'm not going to count his this season stats just because he only played 9 games and he was injured and he shot really bad. But his last season games were like, he was a 19 point game scorer, and he was shooting from 45, close to 45 from 3-point attempts. Like, that's just insane to have these two guys back. Oh my God. Like, I wouldn't even want to think of like the damage that they can do. It's just like Jeff was touching on. You want to see how good they are coming back from this injury, because at 100%, they are so scary. But how close to 100% are they going to be by playoffs? That's the question.
100%, Brian. And I think one of the other things to look out for for the Nuggets is that when completely healthy, when they have Michael Porter, when they have Jamal Murray back, what about the other guards on that team? Because they have Aaron Gordon, they have Boogie, they have Jeff Green, they have Jokic. So in the bigs, they're pretty locked up. But in terms of guards, I mean, Campazzo, I mean, Will Barton's pretty decent. Bryn Forbes is decent. Austin Rivers. I mean, other than Jamal Murray, they don't have a ton of depth at the guard position that's really substantial. So I don't know, where compared to where you're looking at Golden State, they have plenty of guards. I mean, Phoenix, plenty of guards. Even Memphis, they have a lot of pretty good guards. So it's like, I look at that and I say, well, they're maybe the 4th best team when completely healthy in the West. Can they go even higher? I don't know.
Yeah, I can. It's it definitely is tough. I mean, it's just that when you have, I guess, like a player like Jokic, it just kind of makes all those other names that aren't as good, stand even taller. Of like, this entire season, they're playing without probably their 2 and 3 best players, but they still have Will Barton, who's been having a really fantastic season. You have Aaron Gordon, their rookie Bones Highland's playing pretty decent like this season. Like, I feel like they have enough tools. It's just, I think with these two back, they're the biggest like surprise factor. Because as of right now, no one's really talking about the Nuggets, but the Nuggets are still having a pretty good season. It's just the West is the top end for the West is so high right now that that it makes like the Nuggets, who are, like I mentioned, they are 37-26, but they're their sixth seed. Like that's a fantastic record in the East. I think, yeah, that's crazy. So
I agree.
I say let's move on to our last topic, and it's the team spotlight for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, you two are the Nets experts. So generally when we do these team spotlights, we don't have two experts here. But Joe, what do you think about the Nets right now? Especially after all this craziness with the trade and everything. What do you think?
They're just in a really weird spot, and I'm gonna try and say this as unbiased as I can. I at the end of the day, it really does come down to Kyrie Irving coming back for the playoffs. Because listen, 15 games he's played. Here's another statistic. I'm full of statistics today. 38, 29, 31, 27, 15, 14, 26, 32, 30, 24, 30, 27, 9, that stinks, 22 and 22. So, for the most part, I mean, the he's just an unbelievable talent. The amount of points that this man can score is just crazy. He's entering into his prime. I mean, this is the prime of Kyrie Irving right now, the next couple of years. So, I mean, it's all going to come back to that, but if you really look at the rest of the team, I mean, if you look at the team, like, rebuilding wise, even though they're not really in a rebuilding mode, they're in a pretty good spot. Like, they have Ben Simmons. I mean, compared to Karis LeVert or Jared Allen or Joe Harris or Dinwiddie, I mean, he is a player on a different league than any of those guys. When healthy, he's potentially a defensive player of the year. I mean, he can be a great scorer. It's literally just the shooting. He just has a shooting problem. So I look at that, say, with KD, with Patty Mills, with Goran Dragic, who is just an amazing addition to that team. Seth Curry, they finally have a solid center in Drummond. They have Claxton. I mean, I don't think that they have so much talent, and it just doesn't reflect their record. And if they can just get all these different pieces on the floor together, I think that they can be a really successful team.
I think that was really well said. Jeff, do you have anything you want to touch on there?
So I'll just run through a few stats to get us going with this conversation.
Yeah.
So obviously they're at 500. They're 32-32 at this present moment. 8th in the East, 4th in the Atlantic. One thing I want to say, and I said this a few weeks ago to you, Brian, is that I've moved them from being contenders to pretenders at this present moment because of everything that's going on. It's crazy and it's funny too to see how we could just finish having a conversation about the Nuggets and thinking that they had guys that have been out the whole season and believe that they'll just be reintegrated after sitting out that long and still make a run, right? And everyone is of that mindset to think that. But when you bring up the Nets, no one thinks that same way. No one believes that you bring back Kyrie, you bring back Ben Simmons, you bring back Ben Simmons back to basketball rather than to the Nets, but which are the same thing at this point. But you bring those guys back, that it doesn't naturally just make you back to the team that you want to be, right? And so that's the funny part about that whole thing. But I do think there is going to be growing pains if they go into the playoffs not playing at least a couple games to understand each other's game. We harped on it so much last year about and we see it this year too, is that the big three, when it was comprised of James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving. They only played 16 games collectively. So why would I not think the same thing about Ben Simmons, Kyrie, and Kevin Durant? You see, Kevin Durant came back on Thursday. He had a Kevin Durant type game, but one of the biggest issues was, once again, is they had an amazing first half, but as Miami saw the Nets offense, they realized how to stop them, throw a zone on them, because we're going to dare these guys to shoot. And that's when the game literally slipped out of the Nets' hands because they just could not keep up with that. You even saw Miami do that yesterday against the Sixers, but still, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league, so I can't discredit that part of it too. But it does give way to me thinking that, a lot last year the Nets completely embraced the fact of being an offensive first team, and you rely on situational defense to make your stops. And it looked like that was going to work. And if you don't have that roadblock of Harden, getting injured in game one of that semifinals, and then Kyrie eventually going down to in game four, I believe, you might not even be asking these questions, right? So, but this year they took a step to get more defensive players. Funny part is a lot of those players are now gone. Is you moved away from Bembry, you move away from a Javon Carter. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Thank God that you moved away from that. But you now see that there's people asking questions about what this defense is gonna look like and how are they gonna fit in. I don't think the defense is bad. I just think Goran Dragic said this the other day, is that the Nets, unlike what the Heat are doing when they play defense, are playing together when they're on the defensive possessions, right? And that does go back into the culture thing, and like them just having that continuity between each other. I've been in this conversation. I know I'm being really down and being a real Debbie Downer on it, but there is some glaring good parts of this season that I've seen, and why I am optimistic more as for next year than it is this year. But hey, I would love for them to surprise me and make a deep run, or even go and, knock on wood, win a championship this year. I don't want to jinx them, but you know some of the things that I think has been improvements, subtle improvements. Obviously, Kevin Durant's still Kevin Durant, so that's the first thing. Kyrie Irving, you could give this man 2 years in Siberia, and then he'll come back and still be Kyrie Irving. That's one of the best parts too. Being able from that trade, like Joe mentioned, to get an Andre Drummond diversifies how they can use the center position. Now you can have Aldridge in for more offensive possessions, and then you can have Drummond for being that presence to get rebounds, to get their best big and defend them in ways that we uniquely couldn't have done before. About, I believe it was 2 weeks ago or a week ago, they played the Bucks, and we saw how that changed when Drummond was on the floor, and the iconic dunk over Giannis and the block, the pin back on Giannis as well. It's things we have not seen someone on the Nets do all season, because we were just getting embarrassed by this team. But I'll tell you, the biggest surprise for me, and I'm going to give kudos to a development coach first, is Kyle Korver, who's with the Nets now, is seeing how Bruce Brown, as we move away from these slasher defenders that we have, Javon Carter and Bembry now off the team, giving Bruce Brown more of that chance to be what he was last year, is how he's developed his shot and is actually taking impactful threes. And if you go on Stat News right now and look up the team, there's a few outliers that I'm not going to bring up. But 3-point percentage, obviously, Joe only played 14 games, so I'm not going to add him to this list, but he's obviously the highest on the team. But Steph Curry is at 44%, right? Not too far down. Bruce Brown is now sitting at 37, close to 38% from three, and is about a whole point different than Kevin Durant. That is something I did not foresee happening in the beginning of the season. So it's good kudos to him, like changing his game a little bit and being a little bit more cognizant of where his deficiencies are and how he could get a little bit better, because he's still that guy that you could have as a small roller and find that pass, or now at this point, put in a corner and take a three to affect the game.
Yeah, having one of your guys like have that threat of making a three is pretty gigantic. So I think we mentioned Kyle Korver helped Bruce Brown, and we see a little bit with Kyle Korver working with Ben Simmons, and maybe there's some room there for some Ben Simmons making some threes. But Joe, let me bring it to you. How do you think Ben Simmons, when he comes back, fits onto this team?
I'm super excited at how he's going to fit onto this team. He fits that perfect like wing defender role that the Nets really need. And I think that there's like a couple different layers you can look at this Nets team. And to Jeff's point, like who knows how the season will go for them in the playoffs. Like who knows how that will go. But looking at next year, I mean, listen, you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie, so that speaks for themselves. You have like the LaMarcus Aldridges of the world, the James Johnsons, the Patty Mills, the Goran Dragics, the Seth Currys, who are those like solid vet guys who you just need on the team. Like you can't go to a championship without those guys. You just can't. They're so crucial. But I think the most exciting part of the Nets is these young players that they have in Ben Simmons, in Bruce Brown, who has really just like taken up such a leadership role on the team. And I think one of the keys to this team's success in the future, I really think is going to be Cam Thomas. I mean, he's super young right now, but just based on the couple games that he's played, the talent is just right there. And listen, I got some more stats for you guys. A stretch from February 4th to February 17th. He scored 30, 20, 17, 27, 22, 14, 21, and 20 over an 8-game stretch. So at 20 years old, that right there shows me that the potential for him to be an elite scorer in the NBA is just, again, the sky's the limit. And everyone talks about the Cades, the Jalen Greens, the Evan Mobleys, but nobody talks about him as being one of the top rookies of last year's class. So for him to come in as this young guy out of LSU, who also the same college that Ben Simmons went to come in there and really be this legit scorer on the team, and hopefully they can help develop him over the next couple of years. Between those two and Bruce Brown, you have Claxton, Day'Ron Sharpe, like you have a Kessler Edwards. You have a couple of young guys there that are really, really interesting to see how they could develop over the next couple of years. So what's nice about the Nets is that they do have a nice balance of young guys with potential who you could develop, and solid vets who are going to help you take the Nets or take this team to a championship level. So there's a lot of different elements to look at, and they're just such an interesting team right now.
I like what you brought up of the young guys. I mean, Cam Thomas, that guy. I mean, me and Jeff talked about it, during the pod, our first episodes of like, what do you think about Cam Thomas? And it's just always, this man's a walking bucket. He's gonna score it. Like that's what he does. And it's nice to be able to see like he's doing that, and he's doing that extremely well. You touched on like how important it is for them to have all these different vets on this team. Jeff touched on it a little bit as well, But I wanted to ask you, like, what are you, Joe? What are your thoughts and what are your first impressions of seeing Seth Curry on this team, Goran Dragic on this team, and Andre Drummond? And what are your first impressions of them?
I absolutely love it. Seth Curry is he's just a fucking ace. I have some other stats. The 15 games that Seth Curry has played, and excuse my language, by the way.
It's a family show.
So,
I'm joking. I'm joking.
so out of those 15 games that he's played, he's averaging about 16 points. We're looking at a 23-point game, 20, 12, 22, 19, 11, and 18. And just looking at that, like, he's playing really, really well. He fits just like a great role that the Nets need right now as this like off the bench scorer. You can space him, he can shoot. And like to Jeff, what we're saying about Andre Drummond, like the rebounding is just the body and the paint. It's just so important for a team that has just been missing a legitimate center for I don't even know how long. So they're key additions to the team, and just on seeing them like interact with the other team members, like they seem to have a pretty good chemistry already. So, and this is the other thing: how the hell did they get Goran Dragic? Like nobody was talking about him going to the Nets at all. I mean, they were talking about him, going through a buyout and going to the Dallas Mavs. Like the fact that they just got another great point guard to throw into that mix to just offset a little bit of the responsibility that Kyrie would have had if he was playing or when he does come back. It's just these key additions that they've made have been so important to the team, and if they end up making a playoff run, those guys are going to be a big part of it.
It's kind of crazy with like how like centers careers. So you mentioned we talked about Andre Drummond. Like Andre Drummond, I mean the guy's 28 years old and he has had a max contract in his career. Like this guy was one of the best players on his team at some point, even though it was Detroit. And it's just like to see some downtrends in his career, but like to even now, like that talent is still there. He still has the potential to take over some games, but it's not going to happen a ton. But it's nice to be able to have like a center versus what the Nets had before, to put it nicely.
Arguably,
yeah.
I would say arguably the Nets, and I'm not even just thinking recent history. Besides Blake Griffin, I said Blake Griffin. I mean Brook Lopez.
Yeah.
That's always been a Nets problem is getting a consistent center. And you look at the stats of already his impact. Only 7 games, Drummond's already the leader in rebounds on the team. And the leader before that is James Harden. So it just goes to show is that we are small. We do need some help with the rebounds.
Which is kind of funny. I mentioned about like these centers that had amazing careers at first that fell down and now are playing for like minimum contracts. Like I'm looking at it. I'm like, all right, you got Andre Drummond. You had DeMarcus Cousins who just signed with the Nuggets. You have Dwight Howard. Like these were guys at some point were top maybe 4 or 5 centers in the league. And I mean, Dwight Howard was one of the best players at the time. But to bring it back to the Nets, I actually want to ask you, Jeff. So I think just this last week, we got some sad news. And that Joe Harris is actually going to be out for the entire season now. What are your thoughts on that and how that impacts the Nets going forward?
Yeah, no, I obviously I don't think it's a major hit right now because just where they're at right now. It's a blow. It is I'm not saying that it's not a blow. I'm just saying like Joe Harris came back. Do I think that automatically they pick up everything and they're on a 15-game winning streak? Not saying that. That's what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, it's frustration more than it's anything else to me. is Joe had the surgery in November, and he sat out for about 2 months in January. We were having conversations about him coming back before the All-Star break or at the All-Star break, and Nets were going back and forth with options on whether or not to get a second surgery in there to fix the issues that came from the first injury, right? And it took them about a whole month of like, granted, I'm sure it was Joe trying to test it out and hoping and believing that there was a chance he could work with it, right? But they eventually now made that decision. I kind of say like I feel like it's good that we'll never know. I think the Nets are one of the most tight-lipped about their injury reporting teams in the NBA, right? So we'll never 100% know if it was Joe's decision or if it was the team's decision.
Yeah.
But what I would say is whoever made that decision took entirely too long to make that decision because I think there's ways we could have known early on to whether or not we're going to sit him out for the rest of the season and get the second surgery going, and maybe we'll have a chance to have him in the playoffs. But now, because we kind of lollygag through 2 months of this rehab, we're now seeing that he's going to be having a season-ending injury, which is, like I said, quite frustrating because there was ways we could have just averted this and solved this early on when we started seeing issues with it.
Yeah. I think it just kind of goes to show like how much more important a player like Seth Curry is going to be to this team because he can kind of fit that role of being that knockdown shooter. Even though I mean Seth Curry can do a lot more as well, like that. It's heartbreaking and it really stinks that it happened for Joe Harris, but um, luckily enough, you have some really good players on this team that could fill the void. Joe, I want to ask you. So I know even before, like Jeff was talking about, like right now, a little bit down on the team, even though we all know this team is very good. Do you think, as of now, the way this team is constructed, that they have enough to win a championship, if healthy?
Okay, that's a great question. If healthy this year, no. I don't think this year they have a chance to win a championship. And it kills me to say that because I really want to see them all healthy and on the court, but I just don't think that, especially with Ben Simmons, and you're going to need him out there if you're going to win a championship. I don't think that with the time left before the playoffs, I don't know if they can put it together in time. I think that if you tell me next year, do they have a shot? Absolutely. Absolutely next year, I think they have a shot to win a championship. I just think that they're too talented of a team. Like, the talent that they have on their team just doesn't reflect their record. I mean, Patty Mills, LaMarcus Aldridge, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and I mean, you're not even talking about like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Like, this is a pretty stacked team of pretty talented names, and I just wish that this whole situation with Harden could have gotten resolved earlier so that they'd have a little time to ramp up and build up a chemistry before the playoffs happen. But the talent's there. It's just building the chemistry, getting the pieces back to be able to participate in the championship. That's always been the Nets' problem, is having the guys available. I mean, look at last year. If they would have had Kyrie for the rest of that Milwaukee series, who knows what the championship of the NBA looks like. So if you can just get everyone back healthy, and here's another thing about first round of the playoffs, they're the 8th seed. I'm pretty sure if they would play Toronto, and you can't even play Kyrie in Toronto. So this year is just a string of just bad luck, and hopefully next year they'll be in a position where everyone's back healthy. They can galvanize the troops and just make a legitimate championship run.
That's crazy. I actually didn't think about that. Of like, if things ended and they had to play, Toronto and like the play-in stuff, they can't do that. There's still the home game situation, which seems like it's gonna get relieved. And then I hear like quotes from the mayor of New York of him being like, "Oh, I can't change it," blah blah blah, and stuff like that. So that's a story to be continued. Jeff, do you feel the same way? Of this is not the Nets' year, but maybe in the future.
You see, the thing is with the NBA is it's not like other sports, like especially the NFL, where you could get
Yeah,
lightning in a bottle and then just go for a run. Because it's grueling. You had to win 16 games, right?
yeah,
So talent wise, the league is ran off of superstar power, right?
yeah,
Um, I won't deem it 100% like no, but I had a conversation with a friend outside of the pod offline, um, and he asked me what's the percentage of them winning this year, and I'll say that and that's what I'm going to say now. Is I give them a 10% chance. Like that's like it would be a far cry if they actually go all the way and win it this year, just because of how daunting it would be. It would be very grueling to get to the finals at this present moment this year. But do I think they have the facilities to do it? I do think they do, because they do have the players for that
yeah.
could make a run like that. But figuring it all out in this amount of time just doesn't seem feasible. And honestly, you brought it up, Joe, possibly not being able to play in Toronto changes the story. But now let me give you guys an alternative situation. If let's say we have about 18 games left, the Nets go on a run of, let's say, a 15-3 run off of this, that changes it completely. That even moves them possibly out of the play-in. You
Yeah.
know, that's a scenario where I can say when we are presented with that, or if we're presented with that, my conversation about that greatly changes. But right now, based off of what they look like and just the back and forth of the whole season, just makes me think that it's not possible. And honestly, it would be like possibly the first time in NBA history where a team could go on a stretch like that and have a stretch where they've lost. Well, actually, the Nets were the first team to have like a over 10 game winning over 500 season, but then at least I think it was the last since like a Portland team in the 80s. But to have a 10 game losing streak, but also be like 12 games over 500 in a season. So maybe this is a year's for first. Maybe they figure something out. The NBA is ever changing every moment, so who knows?
It's pretty crazy. I just was looking at the Nets schedule going forward. There's at least like 8 or 9 tough games. And by tough games, I mean like versus the Sixers, versus the Mavericks, who have been playing well recently, the Jazz, the Grizzlies, the Heat, the Bucks, like the Cavs. Like those are the tough teams. The rest of them should be easy wins. So it'd be interesting to see where they actually end up going, where they actually end up later on. Um, so I'm personally actually a little bit higher than you two on the Nets of like Jeff, you said like 10% chance. I feel like Kevin Durant alone gives you like a 10% chance to win it all. Like he's just that good. Like he's mentioned, it's a superstar run league. You have arguably the best player in the league on your team. Now you have Kyrie Irving, who could play some games, maybe not, depending on what happens. You have Ben Simmons, who's a potential defensive player of the year candidate, even if he's like doesn't do anything for you just on offense, even though he is a great offensive player too, just not a great shooter. I feel like that alone is enough to like at least a 30% in my mind. And then you have everyone else. But I will ask. So when it comes to the playoffs for the Nets, who are you most afraid of? And we'll start with Joe.
It's either Milwaukee or Philadelphia. Miami's really scary too, but I think it's really those two teams. Milwaukee's still like the defending champs, and they still have Giannis. He's having a great season, and they're just like a good team all around. Philadelphia, it's hard for me not to be angry at Philadelphia. Angry at James Harden as a Nets fan, but keeping this as unbiased as I can. We have to watch out for Philadelphia. They're really, really good. Joel Embiid's having a season. James Harden looks really, really good these last couple games with the Sixers. The Miami is they just have so many great players on that team. My question is, who are they going to put on like a Joel Embiid or Giannis? I mean, they'll maybe have runs with Kevin Durant on him. They'll have runs with Claxton, who I don't know is the best person to defend those guys. Drummond, we all know the beef behind Joel Embiid and Andre Drummond. Aldridge is good, but he's still a little bit older. So like defensively, I have some questions. I think that a big part of it's going to come down to Ben Simmons, honestly. How he comes back. Like, if he comes back playing great defense, hustling, forget about the shooting. They have so many shooters right now with Patty Mills, Seth Curry. As Jeff said, Bruce Brown's picking up the shooting. KD, of course. But if he can come out and play really good defense, it could change a lot of things for the Nets. And it could really change up a lot of matchups. I mean, he could defend such a wide variety of different types of players, guards, forwards, whoever. I mean, the guy's 6'10", so depending on he comes back and how he starts playing, that will depend on how the Nets do. But really, Milwaukee and Philadelphia and Miami are I think the toughest challenges for them.
So get ready for this. Brace for impact. This is going to contradict everything that I said, but I am not really afraid of any of those teams. Everyone in the East has a flaw. Every single team in the East has a flaw. And because of that, I think that very much as I think the Nets can be beat, I also very much think the Nets could easily beat every one of these teams. We look at the Heat. You discuss how potent they are on defense, but you tell me who's going to be the guy when let's quote a little bit of Eminem right now. Yeah, when your knees weak and your arms are heavy, like who's going to be that guy that takes over? Who truly is going to take over that game? And that was the problem that we saw last year with them, is that there wasn't that guy. Is Kyle Lowry now going to be that guy? He has shown he's done that, but I think when he's done that his best, he was running alongside with a guy named Kawhi, so that's my first thing about the Heat is who's going to take the reins when the game gets the hardest, because you could put PJ on KD. He could do the same thing he did last year, but guess what? KD's still going to drop 49 on him. Like, right? Like, that's what you're going to see. So that's the first thing. You look at the Sixers. The Sixers just showed you last night, as well as they looked in that 5-game winning streak, Joel Embiid is the MVP in this league right now. This might be his first one this year. But, my God, it's so funny to see what James Harden was complaining about with the Nets, that the Nets had a deficiency for, is exactly what he has created by getting traded to Sixers, is that they're lacking space. So they, honestly, it was funny to see them throw the same zone that they threw to the Nets just to dare them to shoot, and they lost the way, similarly to how a lot of Nets games have lost. And people never think about that. It's like when these star players demand a trade, you have to trade assets. And those assets that are the reasons why that person is probably intrigued to be on that team are possibly going to be leaving when that player comes. So that's one of the biggest concerns that I see with the Sixers. So one of those guys go down, it's literally over. It's over in my mind for them. And let's say you slow down, you find a way to slow down one of those players. You're now asking Maxey, who has been playing very well this year, but you're asking him to take it to a star level in the playoffs to make up for if James Harden's not playing well. Because, he very well, and he's been known to do this, have moments where he just doesn't show up in the playoffs, right? So you're going to ask Maxey to become James Harden for a few games. I don't know if that's going to work, So there's that. Then you have the Bucks. The Bucks probably look the most exposed they've had in a couple of years. And it's not because of their big three. It's because now they lack bench depth. There's absolutely no depth on that bench, and it's glaring how bad it is right now, because I think that was a difference between the game that they had with the Nets a few weeks ago, is that the guys that they're just bringing in cannot keep up with the same intensity that all of these other teams in the East have, because a lot of teams out in the East have extreme amount of depth. So that's their biggest flaw in the Bucks. Then I look at the Bulls. I really don't think that should be even a conversation. I really do think Nets see the Bulls. We probably go to 6-7. That's it. And then I think we have the Celtics number. They won a couple games, but Kyrie wasn't there. KD wasn't there. It really doesn't matter this year. But the other teams, I think the last team would be the Raptors. On a healthy Nets versus the Raptors, if it's not in Toronto, let's be honest, that should be a Nets winning. But I really see a path with the Nets beating all of these teams. It's just very well, how much do the Nets stop themselves from doing that? And the Nets have been really good at stopping themselves from doing things. So we'll see what it looks like. We'll see if there's some continuity with these guys, and they truly want to win this year. I want to see them just put their hats on and just say, we're not stopping. We're just going to figure it out this year.
I like that. Now this is where the confidence came in. You've been down this entire time, and as soon as this question came up, you're like, man, the Nets, we could beat everybody. Which, I mean, at the end of the day, you're not wrong. Like I mentioned before, with Kevin Durant, we've seen what he can do in the playoffs. Him alone is kind of just enough to really beat any of these teams. And then, Joe, you mentioned too of who's gonna guard Giannis, who's gonna guard Embiid. Maybe not Embiid, but Ben Simmons. You got a guy 6'10", really good defender. Maybe he can do some damage. We'll see. Nice. I like this. This was a lot of fun. Do you guys have anything else you want to add before we close up?
I do. I have one other thing. I just think the one most important thing for the Nets is that they have Kevin Durant, and he's the best player in the world. I think by far. I think that there's a lot of great players who you could put as number 2, number 3. Obviously, LeBron's still good. Steph, Joel is playing well. Giannis. But Kevin Durant, I mean, when he's healthy, he's just on a different level. And at the end of the day, this is his team, and it's going to be him that takes them to the promised land. And I don't know. It's going to be a really exciting playoffs for sure.
Well said. There's a lot of really good teams this year.
I agree. One thing that I would say is, like I talked about yesterday.
Jeff, your mic is cutting in and out. Oh, I think we're good now.
All right, so I'll start it up from the top again. So, like I was saying earlier, is we had a real jam-packed Saturday of sports. But I hope you guys took a couple minutes to see the Coach K game and see UNC and see one guy that's going to be a star soon. And as we're getting closer and closer to the playoffs, I'm loving the fact that we're going to start talking about these future stars that are coming to the league. Paulo Chiro
Yeah.
from Duke. That's
So,
going to definitely be someone we're going to be talking about the next couple weeks. So I'm looking forward to the next couple conversations we have and a couple weeks of going and dissecting the tournament that's about to happen as well. So that should be very interesting and fun. And I'm happy that we were able to do a spotlight this week. And even though it was on a sad note, the Nets aren't playing too great right now, but at least we talked about them.
Oh man, Jeff, you mentioned about the draft. This is kind of where my focus has gone since the Knicks season has been over in like December. Since December, like I've now this is my world. So I'm very excited for the next few weeks. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on, Joe.
yeah, thank you guys for having me.
I'm gonna ask, do you have anything you want to plug?
Not really. I think that I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to be on the pod, and you guys just do a fantastic job. So thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Joe. We're definitely gonna have you on again in the future. This is a lot of fun. Follow Jeff on the Twitter. The links are in the description. Jeff just started the TikTok now, doing some really good work. I'm excited. We'll put those links in the description as well. Be sure to follow us. Let us know what you guys think. And this was episode 23.
Bye.